When you log into ShipWeight with the administrator account, you have access to all functions in ShipWeight. And within this administrator account in ShipWeight, you can create other users and other user groups where you can control the access that these users will have to the various projects. We'll look into how we can create new users and new user groups in this video. On the project menu in ShipWeight, you will find a submenu called Permissions. In this Permission submenu, you will find Administration and Change Password. The Change Password option lets you change the password of the current user that you're logged in with, while the Administration lets you create new users and new user groups. We will look into how to do that. So if I select Administration, ShipWeight opens up a dialog that's called Permissions, and by default there is one user in this system. This is the administrator user, and there is one group, and this is the sysadmin group, and the administrator is a member of the sysadmin group. This is the standard setup in ShipWeight. You can create as many users and many user groups as you want in ShipWeight, regardless of the number of licenses you have. The licenses control the number of simultaneous users, but are not related to the number of users that you create. In addition to create users and user group, this permission dialog also have a tab sheet for password policy for the users. In here you can define whether the password must change for every defined number of months. You can define the number of characters that the password must include. You can define whether the password must include a mix of numbers and characters, and you can also define if the password must change at first login. This policy is then enforced for all users. To create a new user, you go to the user group and click New User. And this brings up a dialog where you can define the username. The username is the name that logs on into ShipWeight. And we can here create a second admin account called admin2, which could be an additional admin account. Now the full name, description, department and email are just for information only and not used for any functionality in ShipWeight. To create this secondary admin account, we select the user group that this user should belong to, and in this case we only have one user group, which is the sysadmin, which is also the group for the admin accounts. So we select the sysadmin group and click OK, and then we define the password for this user, and we have now created a new user for the sysadmin group. This user will have full access to all functions in ShipWeight, including creating other users and other user groups. These ShipWeight users define what can be accessed within the executable application of ShipWeight, but it does not override any permissions given to the Windows user on the SQL Server. So the SQL Server defines what the user can do on the SQL servers, and these ShipWeight user defines what can be accessed and granted permission to within the executable application. Now let's try to create another user group, a user group that we will define should have read-only access. To do that, we click on the Groups tab sheet and we click the Add button, and now we can define a new group, and we can call this group Read Only, and we will make this a group for read-only users. And the next step is to set permissions for this group. If we click on the Permission tab, you will see that we have permissions that can be given to 5 different main categories. And each of these categories have their own subcategories. The main categories are weight information, project information, setting, estimate, and playground. If you assign access to weight information, this is permissions related to weight informations like the weight input, items input, and so forth. Project information is access to define main parameters, project information like ship type, and so forth. Setting is to define custom codes, item settings, and options. Estimate is related to the parametric estimation, and playground access are related to the playground area of ShipWeight. And within each of these subgroups, we can set permissions for read, edit, multiple edit, output, import, and export. The difference between edit and multiple edit is the possibility to do changes to one item at a time, or to do edit to multiple items at a time. Since we are going to do a read-only group, and we would like this user to be able to access all area of the project with read permissions, we will select read on the weight information, read on the project info, reading of the setting, and reading of parametric estimation, and reading of the playground. So now we've set the permissions for read, and the next step is to now define which weight group this user is allowed to be looking into. And this means that we can define that the user have permissions only to a certain branch of the SWIBIS or the work breakdown structure, but in this case we will allow the user to access all groups. So we click the top group, and then all subgroups are automatically also checked. The final tab sheet here, codes, is to define if you want to remove access to certain custom codes for this group. Now that the group have been defined, we can click OK, and now these settings will be saved, and we should be ready to add the user that we assign to this group. Users then will inherit the permissions belonging to the group. So now we're going in here and creating a new user, which we will call Joe, and we give in a full name, and we assign this new user to the read-only users, and we click that the user must change the password at next logon, and click OK, and then we set a temporary password for this user, and now we have defined this new user. So now this user will have read-only access to this project, and we can test it by exit ShipWeight and reopen. And now we will not log in with the administrator, but we will log in as Joe. and we are required now to change the password at first login. We give in the temporary password, and then we create a new password, and ShipWeight opens up for this user, and now this user can read but not access so the user can read things, but he cannot change things. So the user can go into the items dialog, for example, and read, but if the user try to change something here, a message pops up telling that the user have not permissions to do any editing here. To do this, it must be connected to user group with permission wait info edit. So the user can open things, but changing things are not possible. These fields are not accessible for change for the user. The setting for this user group is now only valid for this particular project. So if we exit this project and go back in as the administrator again, so we change from Joe to administrator. And if we change to a different project, so if we open and go into a different project, the new group that we created will not have access to this project, but the group will exist. So if we go to project menu, permissions and administration, we will find this user group here, but if we check for properties, we will see that for this project there are no permissions granted. This means that for user groups other than the sysadmin group, permissions must be given per project. In other words, permissions are granted only for specific projects where you apply the permission settings, but the group that you create will be existing cross project. But again, permissions has to be granted for each individual project, and they can also be set differently to each individual project. If you want to copy the permissions from an earlier project where you've already defined permissions, you can click the import button and find the previous projects where you were setting permissions and click OK. And then the permissions from these projects will be imported and given similar to this new project. For more information about the permission settings, please see the user guide.